Some loves are born in fire. Others simmer beneath the surface for half a century, waiting for permission to exist. Margaret Whitmore was 70 years old when she finally understood that waiting for the world to change meant nothing if you refused to change yourself. And Eleanor Chen, standing on her doorstep after 52 years of silence, drenched in October rain with silver hair plastered to her weathered cheeks, represented every choice Margaret had been too afraid to make. The kiss that followed tasted like regret and revolution, like all the years they'd lost and all the life they had left. This is not a story about young love. This is a story about the courage it takes to claim your truth when society has spent decades convincing you to bury it. The retirement community's autumn festival was Margaret's idea of purgatory, forced cheerfulness wrapped in orange streamers and the cloying scent of apple cider. She'd only come because her daughter insisted, because at 70, apparently, one needed supervision to avoid becoming a recluse. Margaret stood near the punch bowl, watching silver-haired couples sway to big band music, when she saw her. Eleanor. 52 years collapsed into a single heartbeat. The woman approaching through the crowd moved with the same deliberate grace Margaret remembered from 1972, though time had etched wisdom into the corners of her eyes and painted her black hair the color of moonlight. Eleanor wore a burgundy cardigan over pressed slacks, sensible shoes, and an expression that suggested she'd been searching for Margaret as desperately as Margaret had been hiding. Maggie. The nickname hit like a physical blow. No one had called her that since college. Ellie, Margaret's voice cracked around the syllables. I didn't know you lived here. I moved last month. My daughter thought I needed community. Eleanor's smile was tentative, a question mark. I've been hoping I might run into you. The decades between them thrummed with unspoken words. They'd been roommates at Berkeley, sharing everything except the truth that kept Margaret awake at night, watching Eleanor sleep in the twin bed across their cramped dorm room. Then came graduation, Eleanor's unexpected engagement to a man from her church, Margaret's hasty marriage to the first suitable bachelor who asked. They'd promised to write, neither did. Would you like to get coffee? Eleanor asked. Somewhere quieter? Margaret should have said no, should have protected the careful life she'd constructed. 2 children, 4 grandchildren, 37 years of marriage to a good man she'd loved in the way one loves a comfortable chair. Richard had been dead 3 years now, and still Margaret carried his ghost like armor. Yes, she heard herself say, I'd like that very much. They left the festival and drove separately to a cafe downtown, where modern art hung on exposed brick walls and young people typed on laptops. The barista, sleeve of tattoos visible beneath a rolled shirt sleeve, didn't blink at 2 elderly women claiming a corner booth and ordering decaf lattes. I thought about you, Eleanor said, fingers circling her cup. Every day for 52 years I thought about you. Margaret's throat tightened. I'm sorry. For not writing, for disappearing. We both disappeared, Maggie. We buried ourselves in acceptable lives. Eleanor's dark eyes held no judgment, only a sorrow that mirrored Margaret's own. My husband was kind. I had a good marriage, 3 beautiful children, but there was always this empty space shaped like you. The confession hung between them, dangerous and liberating. I was afraid, Margaret whispered, of what loving you meant, of what people would say. I know, I was too. Eleanor reached across the table, her weathered hand covering Margaret's. The touch sent electricity up her arm. But I'm 71 years old, Maggie. I'm tired of being afraid. They began meeting every Tuesday and Thursday, ostensibly for coffee, but really to excavate their shared history. Eleanor brought photographs, Berkeley in the 60s, the 2 of them in bell-bottoms and peasant blouses, arms linked, faces radiant with the innocence of not yet understanding what they were running from. Margaret contributed letters she'd never sent, pages yellowed with age, confessions she'd written and hidden in a shoebox beneath her bed. "Listen to this," Eleanor said one afternoon, reading from Margaret's cramped handwriting. "Dear Ellie, I went to Thanksgiving dinner at Richard's parents' house today. Everyone talked about the wedding. His mother showed me her grandmother's ring. I smiled until my face hurt and imagined it was your hand I'd be holding at the altar." Eleanor's voice broke. "You wrote this in 1972? November 23rd. Margaret remembered the date because it was the day she'd decided to stop fighting. 2 weeks before my wedding. I was already married by then," Eleanor said softly. "Pregnant with Jennifer, standing in my kitchen making cranberry sauce and crying because I'd heard through the grapevine you were engaged." The parallel trajectories of their lives emerged in these conversations. Two women who'd loved each other in an era that had no language for their love, who'd channeled that devotion into acceptable vessels. Eleanor's husband, David, had died of a heart attack 7 years ago. She'd mourned him genuinely, this man who'd given her a life, children, security. But she'd also felt a guilty relief, as if his death had finally granted her permission to acknowledge the truth she'd spent decades suppressing. "Did you ever tell anyone?" Margaret asked. "My therapist, eventually, about 5 years ago." Eleanor's laugh was rueful. "At 66, I finally said out loud that I'd been in love with my college roommate. She asked if I'd ever considered reaching out to you." "What did you say?" "That I was too afraid you'd forgotten me. Or worse, that you'd remember but wouldn't care." Eleanor's fingers traced patterns on the table. "What about you? Did you tell Richard?" Margaret shook her head. "I told myself it was just a phase, college experimentation, that what I felt for you wasn't real because real meant I'd built my entire life on a lie." She paused, the weight of admission heavy on her chest. "Sometimes, late at night, he'd ask why I was crying. I'd blame hormones or stress. He never pushed. I think part of him knew not to ask questions that might have uncomfortable answers." "We were so young," Eleanor said. "The world was different then." "The world is still different now," Margaret countered. "My daughter posted a pride flag on Facebook last year and got 24 angry comments from people we've known for decades. But there's also my granddaughter Maya, who's 17 and openly gay and doesn't understand why it's a big deal." Eleanor's expression softened. "She came out at 15 and all I could think was how much easier her life would be than mine. How she'd never have to choose between her truth and her safety." They sat in silence, the cafe humming around them with the ordinary business of living. Finally, Margaret spoke. "What do we do with this, Ellie? We're 70 years old. We've lived entire lives apart." Eleanor's answer was simple and devastating. "We decide if we want to live what's left together." The confrontation came, inevitably, in the form of Margaret's daughter. Susan arrived unannounced on a Saturday morning, letting herself in with the emergency key, finding Margaret and Eleanor having breakfast on the patio. Just breakfast, coffee and croissants and the newspaper spread between them, but the intimacy was unmistakable in how Eleanor reached to brush crumbs from Margaret's collar, in the easy silence they shared. "Mom," Susan's voice was carefully controlled. "Can we talk? Privately?" Margaret set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. "Anything you need to say, you can say in front of Eleanor." "Fine." Susan's jaw tightened. "People are talking. Mrs. Henderson saw you two at the movies last week. The Patels mentioned you're together constantly, and now I find her here at 8 in the morning?" She turned to Eleanor. "No offense, but this doesn't look appropriate." "Appropriate." Margaret tasted the word like poison. "I'm 70 years old, Susan. What exactly do you think is inappropriate?" "You know what I mean." Susan's cheeks flushed. "You're both widows. It's natural to want companionship, but the way people are talking, they're making it sound like—" She faltered. "Like what?" Eleanor's voice was quiet steel. Like we're together? The silence stretched taut. Is that what this is? Susan asked, looking between them. Because if it is, I need to know. The kids are asking questions. Jeremy came home from school saying his friend's mom said you were gay. Margaret felt the familiar fear rising, the instinct to deny and deflect. 70 years of conditioning didn't evaporate in a few weeks of coffee dates. But then Eleanor's hand found hers under the table, warm and steady, and Margaret remembered why they'd found each other again. Yes, Margaret said clearly. Eleanor and I are together. We were in love in college, before either of us understood what that meant. We spent 52 years living the lives we thought we were supposed to live, and now we're choosing each other. Susan's face cycled through shock, confusion, and something that looked uncomfortably like disgust. You're not serious. You were married to Dad for almost 40 years. And I loved your father, Margaret said firmly. I loved him truly, Susan, even if I couldn't love him completely. He gave me you and your brother, and I don't regret my life with him. But he's gone, and I'm not, and I deserve to spend whatever time I have left being honest about who I am. What will people say? Susan's voice rose. The church? Your friends? My God, Mom, you're 70 years old. This is insane. Eleanor stood, gathering her purse. I should go. No! Margaret rose too, taking Eleanor's hand openly now, defiantly. Susan, I love you, but I won't apologize for this. I won't spend my final years hiding to make other people comfortable. Susan's eyes filled with tears. I can't believe this. Dad would be devastated. The accusation stung precisely because Margaret had worried about it herself, lying awake, wondering if Richard had suspected, if he'd felt cheated by her inability to give him everything. But Eleanor squeezed her hand, and Margaret found strength in the pressure. Your father knew I loved him, Margaret said quietly. And I have to believe he'd want me to be happy. If you can't accept this, then we'll have to find a new way forward. But I won't lie anymore, Susan. Not even for you. Her daughter left without another word, the door closing with a finality that echoed through the house. Margaret stood at the window, watching Susan's car disappear, feeling the weight of choice settle on her shoulders. Eleanor wrapped arms around her from behind. I'm sorry, Eleanor whispered against her neck. Maybe I should stay away for a while. Let things settle. Margaret turned in her embrace. No, absolutely not. I've spent 52 years staying away from you. I won't spend another day. That afternoon, storm clouds rolled in from the west, turning the sky bruised and heavy. They sat on the porch, watching lightning fracture the horizon, Margaret's head on Eleanor's shoulder, and when the rain came, it came in sheets. Eleanor stood, held out her hand. Dance with me. In the rain, we'll catch pneumonia. Let's catch pneumonia then. Eleanor's smile was radiant, reckless, everything Margaret had loved and feared. I'm 71 years old, and I want to dance in the rain with the woman I love. So Margaret took her hand and followed her into the downpour, cold water soaking through her cardigan within seconds, and they swayed together in the empty street while thunder rolled overhead. When Eleanor kissed her, really kissed her, the way they'd never dared in college, Margaret tasted rain and salt and the sweetness of finally coming home. The weeks that followed required courage Margaret hadn't known she possessed. Susan wasn't speaking to her. The church ladies whispered behind their bulletins. Margaret's son called from Seattle, confused and concerned, needing reassurance that his mother hadn't lost her mind. But there were also unexpected graces. Eleanor's daughter bringing them soup with a note that read, Love is love, Mom. Be happy. Maya asking to interview them for her school project on LGBTQ elders. The young couple next door inviting them to a dinner party without hesitation or judgment. They decided Eleanor would move in. The logistics were simple: sell Eleanor's condo, consolidate their lives, stop pretending they were anything other than what they were. But the emotional geography was complicated terrain. They'd been intimate for exactly 6 weeks, learning each other's bodies, with the wonder and awkwardness of first love compressed into aging frames. Margaret's knees protested late-night passion. Eleanor's arthritis medication sat next to the bed. They laughed about needing reading glasses to see each other clearly, about how their idea of rebellion now meant staying up past 10 o'clock. "I'm terrified," Margaret admitted one night, lying in the darkness with Eleanor's heartbeat steady against her ear. "What if Susan never speaks to me again? What if I've destroyed my family for this?" "Do you regret it?" Eleanor asked. Margaret considered the question seriously. She'd lost her daughter's approval, possibly permanently. The life she'd known for 7 decades had been upended. At 70, she was learning to live authentically for the first time, and it was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. "No," she said finally. "I regret the 52 years we lost. I don't regret finding you again." Eleanor kissed her forehead. "Susan will come around, or she won't. But you can't sacrifice yourself to make her comfortable. We spent our entire lives doing that." The truth settled between them. They'd both been dutiful daughters, obedient wives, selfless mothers. They'd contorted themselves into acceptable shapes until the original form was nearly unrecognizable. Claiming this late-life love felt simultaneously selfish and like the most essential act of survival. On a Tuesday morning in December, Susan appeared at the door. Margaret opened it to find her daughter holding a photo album, eyes red from crying. "I've been going through old pictures," Susan said without preamble, "from when you and Dad were young." She opened the album to a photo from Margaret's wedding day. Margaret in white lace, Richard beaming beside her. But what caught Margaret's attention was her own expression, the smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I always thought you looked sad in your wedding photos. I told myself I was imagining it." Margaret's throat tightened. "Then I found these." Susan flipped pages to reveal photographs Margaret had forgotten existed, Berkeley yearbook pictures, Eleanor and Margaret laughing together, the connection between them obvious even across decades. "You looked happier with her then than I've seen you look in years." "Susan, let me finish." Her daughter's voice wavered. "I've been angry. Angry that you lied, that Dad maybe never knew, that you waited until now. But I've also been thinking about all the times I've told my kids to be true to themselves, to live authentically. And then I got mad at you for finally doing exactly that." She looked up, tears spilling over. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry it took me this long to understand." Margaret pulled her daughter into her arms, both of them crying now, Eleanor watching from the doorway with her own tears tracking down her cheeks. "I loved your father," Margaret said against Susan's hair. "But I also love Eleanor. Both things can be true." "I know," Susan whispered. "I'm trying to understand that. Give me time?" "All the time you need," Margaret promised. Later, after Susan left, after Eleanor had made tea and they'd sat in companionable silence processing the morning's emotional storm, Margaret looked at the woman beside her, silver-haired, beautiful, miraculously here, and felt the full weight of gratitude. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For being patient, for waiting 52 years, for showing up in the rain and refusing to let me hide anymore." Eleanor took her hand, threading their fingers together. "I'd wait another 52 years if I had to, but I'm glad we don't have to." Outside, the winter sun broke through clouds, painting their living room in shades of gold. They sat in its warmth, two women who'd taken the long road to each other, finally home. Margaret and Eleanor proved that authenticity has no expiration date. At 70 and 71, they built a life that honored both the past they'd lived and the future they chose together. They faced judgment, yes, but also found unexpected allies. They learned that courage doesn't mean fearlessness. It means moving forward despite the fear. Their story reminds us that the heart doesn't retire, that desire and connection and the need for authentic love persist across every decade of life. We spend so much time waiting for the right moment, the perfect circumstances, the world to change. But sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply claim our truth, regardless of our age or the years we've lost. If Margaret and Eleanor's story resonates with you, share it. Let it be a reminder that it's never too late to live honestly, to choose love over fear, to become who you were always meant to be. And if you're still waiting for permission to be yourself, this is it. Don't wait another 52 years. The rain tastes sweetest when you've been thirsty your whole life.